what is all of this Medicare for all controversy about? What I was able to summarize is there are generally three things that are really bees in some people's bonnets. The first one is that there's a view that Yang is appropriating the Medicare for All label, but isn't supporting Sanders' Medicare for All Act of 2019. So basically, the argument is, hey, he's using the term Medicare for All, but he isn't supporting the act, the bill as written by Sanders, and presumably as supported by Warren. And so if he's not going to support that type of implementation of Medicare for All, then he shouldn't use that term. He should call it something else. So the second argument is that because Yang's Medicare for All plan does not call for the immediate dissolution of private health insurance, that it isn't disruptive enough. And then the third is that, when the Yang gang pushes back on these criticisms, it's just full of bots and kind of brainwashed zealots. So let's go into each of them. Is Yang appropriating the term Medicare for All? Well, the first thing I would say is that this whole Medicare for All term really isn't accurate. If the ground truth is Bernie's bill, then I think if you surveyed most Americans and you said, hey, Medicare for All, do you think that means that if you get employer health insurance today, that you will lose it and you will have no choice but to go on Medicare? I think a lot of people would be like, whoa, no, I didn't realize that. I thought it just meant anyone could get it if they wanted it. The reason why I believe that is today, Medicare is not mandatory. So if you're over 65, you can get it if you want it. If you don't want it, you're welcome to have private health insurance. That would not be possible under Bernie's bill. So Bernie's bill is really about single payer, meaning all of the healthcare providers, medical device companies, pharmaceuticals companies, they all get paid by one entity, which is the US government. And that's not how Medicare works today. So, we could argue about who owns the term Medicare for All, but I'm just saying it's kind of a misleading term if ground truth is Bernie's bill. If you wanted a really accurate, honest term, what you should call it is mandatory Medicare, because that's what it is, right? You're not allowed to have private insurance anymore. You can get private insurance for anything that is not covered by Medicare, but if Medicare does cover, basic primary and some experts and specialists, then you can't get private insurance that will cover you and provide for that stuff. You can only get it for stuff that's not covered under Medicare. So mandatory Medicare, single payer, Medicare for everyone without alternatives, no more employer-based insurance, government healthcare for all, Medicare only. The appeal of Medicare for all is that it does sound a bit like an empty vessel, and that I think most people would think it means that, anybody who wants Medicare can get it the same way any retired person today who wants Medicare can get it. So that's number one, that this term that we're trying to fight over is kind of a very ambiguous term and an inaccurate term, depending on, I would argue it's Yang's plan is a more accurate plan if you want to call something Medicare for All. Bernie and Warren's plan really should be called mandatory Medicare or Medicare for everyone. Yeah, I don't know. But it's a kind of a fuzzy term to begin with. Point two is that isn't what we're all after the trying to get everybody covered, and also to have enough of a buying position such that a larger Medicare program has the ability to negotiate prices with healthcare suppliers. I think that's really what we're after, like whether or not there happens to be private health insurance coexisting with a public option. I mean, that just seems like not the most important thing. I do respect people who say, hey, you need so much power in the hands of the single payer that you're just not going to get that with the public option. Or maybe you say, well, all the healthy people will be on the private plans and then the unhealthy people will be on the public plans. Yeah, I could get all those arguments. So I'm not saying it's a no-brainer that you wouldn't want single payer. I am saying there's probably a path to get there. And when we're talking about a multi-trillion-dollar industry, overnight, kicking 150 million people off their private healthcare is probably not a very smart thing to do, just from an execution point of view. My last point is that, Medicare for All isn't really Bernie's name. Back in 2006, it was used by Kennedy, the Medicare for All Act of 2006. And that was not single payer. That was public option. So if you really want to be a stickler on what Medicare for All means, then you could argue that Bernie's stealing it from the public option version, which was Kennedy's version, and closer to Yang's version. At the end of the day, call it what you want or have more clarity in the description. Maybe no one should call their plan Medicare for All. Why are people so fired up over this term? I mean, aren't we all trying to do the same thing, which is reduce costs, increase coverage? And if Yang and even Buttigieg is in favor of a stronger public option, isn't that like a revolutionary step? I mean, which takes me to the second point, which is, Yang's Medicare for All plan is not disruptive enough. Let's be clear, having a public option is something that Obama was unable to get done, even as a very popular president coming in and using almost all of his political capital for the ACA. So if Yang got it passed, he would have done something Obama couldn't do, and he would have grown a program that is almost $1 trillion a year quite significantly. That's a pretty big bargaining chip when it comes to negotiating with the healthcare providers. Just even enabling Medicare to negotiate drug prices would be freaking massive. So I wouldn't dismiss the Yang Medicare for All plan. The second thing is it's less disruptive than Bernie and Warren's plan, but at some point being disruptive can turn into being chaotic and causing unintended consequences. And there's 150 million Americans today who are on private health insurance and who would lose it under the Sanders and Warren plans. Out of those 150 million, let's just assume 100 million are registered voters. You really want to try and win the general and tell them that they're going to lose their health insurance? I don't know who's going to be excited about that. Let's be honest. In the general, Trump is going to say, if we go with the Bernie Warren style Medicare for All, he's going to say, these socialists are trying to take away your insurance. They're going to force you on government health care. It's going to be completely inefficient. There's going to be long waiting lists, blah, blah, blah. It's going to be like the Soviet Union, yada, yada, yada. And I get that there's a lot of BS in those accusations. But if you've watched focus groups with swing voters like in rural Pennsylvania, Ohio, Wisconsin, Michigan, Florida, I don't know that they're going to be anxious to lose any private insurance if they have it. And if they don't have it, I don't know that they're going to fall in love with the idea of government-run healthcare. Because, I mean, look at even the healthcare that we provide to veterans. It's not fantastic. And so having that for everybody, I don't know. It's not a winning general election strategy, in my opinion. In fact, there have been surveys of Americans about this, about Medicare for All. So here is some research from September of this year. And what you see is that 47% of Americans are opposed to single payer. You'll see that 47% of Americans are opposed to getting a plan where everybody gets their insurance from a single government plan. And that opposition is actually higher now than it was in 2017 when only 38% were opposed. So the Bernie style Medicare for All plan has less support now than it has 2 or 3 years ago. Republicans strongly oppose it. 6 in 10 Republicans strongly oppose it, while 4 in 10 Democrats strongly favor it. So if you want to activate the Republican base to turn out and vote for Donald Trump, you should propose a single government plan Medicare for all.